The primary victim of the current attack upon America has been our history. Statues are toppling and buildings are burning based on the assumption founding fathers and the nation they built deserves to be destroyed due to their flaws. While certainly all have sinned and fallen short, 9 times out of 10, the accusations against the founders are not only ahistorical, but false. The claims are often agenda-driven rather than truth-driven. Perhaps the most targeted founding father is Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, the first Secretary of State, and our third president, is the target of many lies and much fake history. A wave of these revisionist attacks against Thomas Jefferson started in 1998, over 170 years after his death. In November of 1998, a startling bombshell announcement was made that a recent DNA study had proved that 2 centuries earlier, Thomas Jefferson had fathered children with one of his slaves named Sally Hemings. Where did this claim come from, and why was the announcement made when it was? Well, to understand this, we have to travel back in time to November of 1998, and that month, the initial results of the DNA tests were published, and a frenzy of articles were written with various interpretations of the data. The DNA showed that Sally Hemings' youngest son, born in 1808, had DNA related to Thomas Jefferson's. A professor named Joseph Ellis soon became the champion of the party, arguing that Thomas Jefferson indisputably fathered a child with his slave, Sally Hemings. But what else was happening during 1998? When the DNA results were released, the impeachment of President Bill Clinton for lying about sexual indecency was at its height. And what do you know? Professor Ellis was a staunch defender of Bill Clinton while also campaigning for the Jefferson-Hemings conspiracy. Furthermore, Professor Ellis was a co-signer of the New York Times petition against impeachment and even confessed that, quote, President William Jefferson Clinton also has a vested interest in this revelation about Jefferson and the DNA. Immediately, supporters of Clinton filed in lockstep behind Professor Ellis because of what Jefferson was alleged to have done. The support was clearly political. A later independent scholars commission noted that, quote, Clinton's apologists made part of their defense the notion that every president, even Jefferson, had his sexual indiscretions. For Democrats, the DNA study was a gift from heaven, a miracle of political manna. Progressives leaped at the chance of opining about the supposed relationship between the older master and his young slave. A veritable cottage industry sprouted up around the Jefferson-Hemings theory. The only problem? None of it was true. Just 8 weeks after the original blockbuster announcements, the scientist who had actually done the DNA study explained that the DNA test did not prove that Jefferson fathered any children with Sally Hemings at all. The results had been twisted and unbelievably overstated. For instance, the study never used any of Thomas Jefferson's DNA. Since Jefferson had no male descendants, the study relied on the DNA from an uncle for the testing. Hardly ideal for a paternity test. Furthermore, while Hemings' youngest child did have DNA related to a Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson was just one out of 26 Jefferson males who lived in the area, 10 of whom could have reasonably been the father. Despite this unstable basis for the claims of Thomas Jefferson's paternity, out of the 221 articles which repeated the initial claims, hardly any reported the correction. So, if Thomas Jefferson was but one of 10 possible fathers of the child, was he the most likely choice? Absolutely not. The far more likely father was Thomas Jefferson's do-nothing younger brother, Randolph Jefferson. For starters, Randolph was both single and in the area when Hemings' son was conceived. Furthermore, the child was given a Randolph family name, Eston. An old slave of Monticello later recalled that Randolph used to come out among the black people, play the fiddle, and dance half the night. Additionally, the oral tradition which led to the DNA study claimed that Jefferson was the father of Sally Hemings' oldest son named Thomas Woodson. Case closed, right? I mean, the son was named after the father. Actually, the DNA test proved that Thomas Woodson had no DNA even moderately related to the Jefferson family line. Going even further, the first political smear campaign which alleged that Thomas Jefferson had fathered a child with Sally Hemings was published in 1801. But the DNA study showed that none of the Hemings children had any biological connection to the Jefferson family until 1808, So why do revisionist academics believe an allegation which has been verifiably refuted by the very DNA study they claim to stand by? But don't just take my word for it. The Independent Scholars Commission, which spent over a year examining all the historical evidence, came to the same conclusion. They write that, quote, "The circumstantial case that Eston Hemmings was fathered by the president's younger brother is many times stronger than the case against the president himself." In an age of fake news, we must also be wary. So often the narrative which is presented as fact is merely a fiction designed to push a certain agenda. There is no serious historical reason to believe that Thomas Jefferson fathered a child with Sally Hemings, especially when there are other, far more likely suspects. It's important to know this information because now, more than ever, we cannot surrender to the leftist mob that clamors for nothing less than absolute submission. The radical left demands that we sacrifice everything, our history, our institutions, our nation, upon the altar of liberalism. We must return to the sources and say no to these demands. We must defend our nation, and it starts by learning the truth about our past and who we are. From Wall Builders, I'm Jonathan Ritchie.